Hello, welcome to the No Way Jose podcast. Today, we're getting into part 7 of what really happened in the Dutroux Affair. We'll be joined, as always in the series, by Austin Picard. We'll be continuing where we left off, digging into Michel Nihoul's life, and now we'll be jumping off of there, kind of going into his connections to the upper elites in that area, Belgium, and kind of how that ties into the paramilitary aspects of things like Gladio, and then kind of how the degenerate underbelly kind of how those things interplay. With that, hope to see you guys on the show. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you can see when new episodes drop. We'll see you in the show. Really, it's the same thing we've always kind of come back to on our show, like the idea of how all roads seem to lead back to Gladio, and it's almost like Gladio's this multifaceted op with so many different layers. There's like drug trafficking, sex trafficking, network, like blackmail, like all different, there's satanic elements, and this is kind of one of the best examples of this.
How do you bear to live with what you already know?
I can't say.
You can't say.
Hey, Austin, welcome back to the show. Pleasure to have you on here. See you every week. It's never frequent enough. Glad to have you back. By the way, just a little warning, an apology. I'm sorry if I sound a little nasally and gross. I'll try to keep myself muted. Had to cancel this morning's show, and had to use the hanky in the show before that due to being a little sick. Some kind of that dry, gross period. So I'll try to stay muted. Try to keep my talk to a minimum. But I'm just the host here. The one giving you the probing questions to kind of dig into what we're getting into today. Which is where this kind of gets really into the interplay of what me and you really seem to hover around. Kind of how, we've seen with the Dutroux Affair, we kind of been talking about, obviously crazy child trafficking stuff going on, but now we're really going to get into today kind of how that ties into the larger network Gladio type of conception, essentially, the kind of as we've laid out in many other shows that we've done together, and, kind of see how these things all play in, because not everyone really ties into this degenerate component into Gladio, but Dutroux Affair is kind of a good insertion point to connect the two.
Right. Yeah, I think it's honestly just diving further into the case as much as we have, it really opened up this extraordinary example to me that I didn't realize the ultimate scope of what we're dealing with as far as a criminal organization, and how it really is the perfect example and window into how they formed and very much entrenched this child sex mafia in a way that utilized blackmail for this very purpose of political, positioning these various assets. But I think, as always, it's rooted in these various secret fraternal organizations that seem to wield this very powerful influence and then also collaborate in this very effective way with the intelligence apparatus. And so, post-war, what do we see is this Gladio strategy of tension at large in a very real way. And I think fundamentally this is one of the greatest examples we could ever point to prove the ultimate level of corruption. And I think that has really been so long-standing and leads into the current moment. And in no way do I believe that this is no longer a vital playbook that they are relying upon, right? And just as far as like influencing the current political environment and the structure of power. And so just, man, when I looked at just as far as like, you get into how there's so many different various connections to criminal organizations like powerful mafiosos and Sicilian mob figures and things of that nature to this very network, and some of the organizations and businesses that stem from the network and the pivotal power players involved with Dutroux. And so I figure, like, I don't know, the best place for us to probably start would be to reintroduce some of the more politically prominent characters involved, and were, I think, ultimately the most prominent perpetrators within the framework of the network as well, who more than likely we can prove with pointing to this evidence that Michel Nihoul was very much just doing the bidding of this wider network that was far more powerful than he alone could ever be. And so once again, I think we're witnessing the fall of a middle management personality, such as almost like a Jeffrey Epstein, in my opinion, at this point, where again, this is more low hanging fruit, and the wider network lives on, right, and prevails to continue with this form of sinister abuse. So, um, but yeah, I think basically because we've been really discussing so much of Michel Nihoul and how he really provides us with the best example of, and also I think the best introduction to most of these characters and how they really became prominent within the network and what roles they were effectively carrying out as well. And I think but also, what's interesting is I saw a quote from Regina Louf again, because I'm going back through the X dossier as always, and just reading up on certain examples that might apply to the context of what we're discussing. And she said in the X Files, she said, when I was 9 years old, Mish, which is what all the child victims would call Michel Nihoul, they knew him as Mish. And she said Mish took me with him, apparently with Tony Vanden Bogart, which was her handler and pimp, which was assigned to her by her grandmother, took me with him already and instructed me to hang around a specific person. So this is what Michel Nihoul was instructing Regina Louf to do at 8 years old and 9 years old. Mish asked me to go stand next to a customer to make a photo. The customer knew he was trapped. At night, they had been in control. Now they were being controlled. Once they realized they were trapped in the network, they started to experiment even more. It seemed like a stepping stone towards even more cruelty. X1 explained there was an example of how there was a room in a mansion in Brussels on Avenue Louise where a camera was set up for the purpose of secretly capturing not only child sex, but abuse which X1 was supposed to get the customer to do to her, because normal sex was often not enough. So the real meaning of the word blackmail is, Regina Louf would say, personally, she began to understand, right, just the real meaning of the word blackmail, a word never pronounced in the network, when I was about 14 years old. So I just thought that was very interesting, because it does seem to perfectly apply to just exactly what they were encouraging these child victims to engage in on behalf of the network. And I think also the pivotal role of what Michel Nihoul was playing operationally on the ground with these victims, because not only was he abusing them and procuring them for the network, but he seemed to be arranging the political blackmail angle of what the child victims would ultimately supply and provide, right? Just as far as, I think that was probably the most valuable component, to this disgusting recipe. But anyway, it's very strange to actually get her personal reference point of claiming that from the moment one has had sex with a child, one is chained, is what she said, unless all parties involved keep their mouths shut. Contracts between the business and the political world, contracts among business people, cheating with subsidies or permits, the establishing of fake companies, criminal contracts, and illegal arms trade. Nothing was impossible. And it always ended with sex and children. When the deal was good, the other party got the services for free. They then were allowed to do all kind of immoral things with one or more children for free. Pictures were taken jokingly to keep both parties to their contracts. The pictures were used for blackmail. These parties were a nightmare for the kids. And she also obviously explains how customers would be given a choice, right, and ultimately decide that they could also pay additionally for torture and murder to take place with the child victims. And so that very much was taking place, as we've pointed out, with examples like North Fox Island and things of that nature, with these almost subscription models for pedophiles, and this looks like it very much fits that same bill. So unfortunately, we have yet another example, obviously, of how sinister this network really was. But as far as the prominent personalities, though, I think we should probably start with, obviously, just considering the level of power that Paul van de Beenens obviously held in terms of the Belgian government. I mean, he was the former prime minister, right? And just understanding that he served multiple terms as prime minister as well, I think is important to point out. And I think he was originally a representative, a political representative for the we were discussing privately this socialist party that was called the Christian Social Party, and it seemed to wield a pretty high level of influence as far as this major center-right political party in Belgium that existed. I think
very aesthetically right, very aesthetically right wing too. I think is one thing to emphasize, because you said socialists, and then a lot of people will immediately associate that with the left. Right. Depending, I mean, these are broken paradigms to begin with, anyways, left, right. But if you're talking about in the aesthetic sense of like, oh, kind of Heil Hitler type stuff, Hugo Boss outfits, kind of that vibe, like it's more in that vibe is my understanding. So just to be clear, but even then, they're still calling for socialism, so they are calling for a socialized government. So. All right, so back to VDB. You just mentioned him. We talked about his Christian Socialist Party. I think I might have that a little bit messed up. Bear in mind, we are dealing with different languages. I think it's like the PSC or something, so the language doesn't quite match up. But I think the closest approximation is like the Christian Social Party or something like that. Mm-hmm. So talking about VDB, and so let's talk about a little bit how he ties into this wide sinister network.
Yeah, man. So it's interesting because obviously he was as we had just previously mentioned, the fact that he was a former prime minister that at least served two administrations, I believe. I think they were not necessarily consecutively. I think there was one individual term in between. From 66 to 68 and then 78 to 79. So that's as far as his time in office. But at the same point, what I thought was interesting is that he was a prominent businessman in the meat industry, and apparently his meat company was under investigation basically for trafficking drugs, right? Which I thought was very interesting in terms of the network, and we'll get at a certain...
Very cinematic too. I mean, not to cut up your flow, but it is like, I mean, immediately comes to mind like mob movies, the 100%. The bodies hanging in freezers, yada yada. So
right, yeah. And so as a representative for the PSC, Christian Social Party, which we sort of described already, I think he was a key and prominent representative at least between 49 to 79, right? And I think he also led the Christian Democratic, I think CEPIC is what it effectively became, obviously. He led CEPIC in this strange conservative faction that we were kind of illustrating as well in a way. But
yeah, we were talking behind the scenes. I do think we should take... I know it seems like, and it is, I mean, hell, I've done episodes on other people's shows where I've talked about this stuff, and even still, I struggle with the terms and this because they are so foreign to us, and it's hard to conceptualize. We were talking before the show with like CEPIC and stuff, and I think it might be useful to try to conceptualize it in a Like, for example, I'm not necessarily saying this is exactly the case, but like, say with the PSC, and I think it's not exactly a perfect one for one, because if I'm understanding, I think Belgium's like not quite the duopoly that we have. They have more parties. It's like a slightly different system, from my understanding. I'm not super in touch with it, but a good way to maybe understand this would be like the PSC perhaps being, which is this Christian social party we mentioned before, maybe being kind of like the GOP, and then something like CEPIC being like, I don't know, like an America First or something, like kind of like some sort of group that's not necessarily married to that party, but generally speaking is associated with that party.
Exactly.
So something along those lines. So
Yeah,
yeah,
just
sorry.
another vessel and vehicle of influence in a certain way. I feel like in terms of just the fascist Gladio paramilitary underground would obviously be just an offshoot that would be on the ground operationally speaking in regard to just these power organizations in the political sphere, right? And I think as far as where we should probably begin is the formation of the PSC and CEPIC. I believe it was 1949. I was explaining to you privately when Paul Van den Beinen's the prime minister, obviously not until 62, I believe, but he had formed with apparently an individual by the name of Joe Girard. He and Joe Girard had set up this committee for the revival of the PSC, which was successful apparently, and they became basically the top prominent players within the newly formed PSC, right? So I think there had been some sort of political influence organization prior to this, and they were basically reforming it. It was almost like a
Did
what
I
do you
did I hit the nail on the head way too hard? I didn't even think about that. That PSC is a
right.
reformation of. I didn't know it was a reformation of like. I almost want to dig into this a little bit more. I mean,
Mhm.
maybe for privately or something. But America First, that's also exactly the same thing. I didn't even think about that with the parallels for that. What was it? I mean, I'm terrible with my history, but was it like Hindenburg? I forget, but I know it was back in the and I think it was a little bit pre-50s. America First was an actual movement, so that is
Oh
part of
yeah.
like a thing people bring up frequently. Say when when MAGA when Trump tries to claim America First as his or like however he defines it, and you're like, no, this is actually a revival of a political movement from like decades past type thing. And so I didn't
Exactly.
realize the same thing with PSC. That's funny.
Yeah, it seems to be, and as far as America First, I think it definitely does have some kind of long-standing track record and history within the domestic U.S. I think it was President Woodrow Wilson originally was a huge promoter of it, I believe, during his presidential campaign or something to that effect. If I can
Sounds right.
remember, it was like 1916 or something when it was an attempt to essentially propagandize individuals into manufacturing consent for World War One is really what was happening, I think, and
There's
America
no
First.
modern parallels.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, man, this never ends. But yeah, so it's very similar thing because the PSC and apparently was also known as the CVP as well at some point, and yeah, again existed from 45 to 68. So it looks like it did predate the reformation of their version, right? Their new brand, rebranded version of the PSC, which was obviously formed by VDB himself, Van den Beinens. So I guess it was a few years after the original PSC had already been formed, because it was 1949 that he himself had essentially helped form or reform the PSC. So that looks like the timetable of how this political party or political organization became far more influential. But so yeah, around 1949, right? You have uh, just again, and I think it was 1955 actually when you had the think tank, which was allegedly set up within the PSC. Which was apparently supposed to contend with some sort of labor union wing that was already established within the organization itself, and somehow neutralize them, and that was allegedly the goal. But around the exact same time, 55, you have Paul Van den Beinens meeting Baron Benoit de Bonvoisin. And I think this relationship is so pivotal in terms of the Dutroux Affair specifically, and just both of their faces. Honestly, if you look up Benoit de Bonvoisin, there's a reason they called this man the Black Baron. Uh, this I've never seen someone who is more blatantly and obviously a pedophile at face value, but this is one of them, and darkness all over him. But so this is when basically their relationship forms, and you have VDB and Baron Benoit de Bonvoisin becoming involved very heavily with the PSC and CEPIC as well, which they would form in 1972, I believe. So you have together VDB and what they call BDB, which is ridiculous that these are their nicknames, but it's the way of the world. So they would each become very prominent figures within the Belgian fascist underground. And I think as you begin to realize that the people becoming involved in the PSC are all these usual suspects, right? Involved in the network. You have I think it was Malachor Wathelet or something. I've never been able to pronounce his name. Wilfred Martins and Henry Beale, which they would all do these low-level jobs for members of the PSC. And I think Henry Beale was actually VDB's private driver, right? So once again, you have this strange chauffeur connection that we've mentioned far too many times, right? And which again, also, there are fleets of cars that are very much implicated in many of these scandals that are happening around the most prominent and powerful, I think, influential moments of this specific network being alive and well, right? And I think there was like a fleet of 5 Mercedes involved in a major scandal, which again, it's like when you get into how they're trafficking the children, the enterprise reveals itself. They have witness testimony that claims numbers, prices in terms of per victim and things of that nature. It's very disgusting and disturbing. But anyway, so you have the private driver factor, and you also have an individual named Roger Boas, and he, along with Benoit de Bonvoisin, become involved in CEPIC. And obviously, VDB had formed or was a major part of Circle de Nation, which he had allegedly founded in '69. And so you have the Front de la Jeunesse, founded by basically these. It was fascists of the club set up by the NEM, the Nouvelle Europe magazine, which is a publication, right, that was founded by VDB and BDB in 1971. So again, you have this relationship, and you see this publication forming on behalf of the network as a front in a way. And so that happens by 71. And also remember that Michel Nihoul first met Paul Van den Benitz in November 1981. And this allegedly happened at the PSC, my friend. So where they discussed an aspect of something to do with this medical financial scam that apparently this was a major financial scam that Nihoul and Annie Booty were setting up and staging, and apparently making a major profit on behalf of the network. And so that was something they were specifically discussing in November of 1981 at the PSC headquarters. So we have an actual, just detailed, descriptive version of this meeting, right? And I find that fascinating. And again, the scandal itself was called the Centre Medical Dest Affair, something to that effect. And so again, everything's an affair in Belgium, obviously. But
and the words are very hard.
They're
The
very hard,
translations
dude.
don't
I'm
make
telling you.
help. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And I did my best in my own personal episode, obviously, but man, you can only remember so many. And how often am I supposed to go to and again, how much can you rely on the translation, even when you're dealing with almost this digital translation version? Most of it's like a computer robot, or you'll get just some asshole who's recording his voice, and you have to rely on the fact that he hopefully understands the dialect. But anyway, to get back into the introductory kind of mode of the more power players and prominent figures, Van den Benitz, as we mentioned, former Prime Minister of Belgium, member of not only the Circle des Nations, which he had set up himself allegedly, but he was a member of Opus Dei, right? And this is all the while he's a very vocal supporter of NATO. And I think it was in '69, as I had mentioned, when he would become one of the founders of the Circle des Nations. And this was a right-wing anti-communist and pro-NATO exclusive social club that was allegedly composed of this, elite, small, exclusive number of individuals who apparently gave public financial support and not only financial support, but just, just as far as their political positioning publicly and things of that nature, to Augusto Pinochet, Francisco Franco, Antonio Salazar. So you have these dictatorships that are being very much, spotlighted given a positive, spotlight in some sort of sense, being propped up and facilitated by members of the Belgian aristocratic state in a real way, obviously, in terms of VDB. But so I definitely don't think it's just as far as over a dozen members of Circle des Nations are allegedly implicated in the Dutroux Affair. So if that's the case, then when Van den Benitz by 71 with VDB or with BDB, the Benoit de Bonvoisin, found the NEM Club, the publication Nouvelle Europe magazine. This is where it became a platform for the organization of the NEM clubs, the fascist paramilitary clubs. And so in the foundation of both Circle des Nations and Nouvelle Europe magazine, Van den Benitz was partnered with Benoit Baron, the Black Baron, right? Benoit de Bonvoisin. So
they were a power couple, yeah.
Exactly. So again, another member, by the way, of Opus Dei, who played a very prominent, vital role in apparently fundraising for VDB, which makes a lot of sense. And so his, besides the Black Baron's work with Van den Benitz, in '73, he funded the creation of the Front de la Jeunesse. So this is where you have this fascist organization directly formed out of the NEM Club, to which he was directly appointed as, apparently he specifically appointed an individual by the name of Francis de Sonia as the leader. And so a year later in '74, Bonvoisin would play a key role in funding the PIO, the Public Information Office. So this is a branch of Belgian military intelligence that worked very closely with private intelligence groups and was even headed by Jean-Marie Bougereau, who's a very vital character as far as a prominent perpetrator in the Dutroux case specifically. So, and obviously these are very prominent connections, but my God, these names are so close together. VDB and BDB it's going to be difficult for us to say these things.
And
honestly.
even then, it's going to be. And I apologize. We're going to do our best, but we can't be hemmed up defining groups. There's so many groups within groups within groups within groups within groups. I mean, we're going to try to focus on the important ones. We have, the PSC, the larger, large political party. We got CEPIC below it. From CEPIC sprouted, I believe that's kind of VDB and Baron and Bonvoisin both kind of had the Front de la, am I missing up? The Nouvelle de la, whatever, the publication.
Nouvelle Europe magazine, NEM.
Yeah. The NEM, and from there you get the NEM clubs, so that's what we mentioned, and then from there, now we're at Front de la Jeunesse, is kind of where we're centered at right now. Just to refocus, I know it is confusing. It's even every time I go back through this in my head, I have to go do it's almost like a chain, to try to figure it out, we were talking about this before, it's weird. It's almost like the Aurora Boreas. We're going to follow this chain, and it's going to come right back full circle. I think when we get to the bottom of it, when we get to the inner glowy core, then we'll find it circle right back around to those weird elites again. So, yeah.
Exactly, and I really do think that as far as just understanding the format and structure of this network is very important and obviously worth identifying and acknowledging and so understanding that at least the hierarchy almost of how it was structured and as you just laid out it so we go from the NEM obviously the Nouvelle Europe magazine to actually forming the fascist organization from this umbrella directly out of the NEM as a club, which became the Front de la Jeunesse, which is just one of a few different, obviously, paramilitary fascist organizations that were under this umbrella of the NEM
And
club.
real quick, not to keep stepping on you, but I did want to kind of put it in modern terms real quick. I've been thinking on this as we've been talking about. With the NEM, it would be, I know it seems a little bit weird for today's sensibilities because you're like, what a fucking, some magazine or whatever, but like that's the equivalent of like the internet chat rooms and stuff like that today. And then, so you have like the chat rooms, the get togethers, and then you could honestly say like, the actual like real meetup like Front de la Jeunesse stuff would be kind of like the actual in real life militia meetups, like get-togethers and kind of shoots and what. I mean, I don't know exactly what they were doing at those meetings, but that's kind of how I would conceptualize it in a modern day. I mean, you have all these internet chat rooms where you're talking about the boogaloo or whatever, and now a handful of people get together and they go out to the range, and next thing you know, there's a few glowies among them, and they're going to jail or whatever, or now ta-da, false flag. But yeah.
Yeah, and as far as I think whenever the PIO was formed, in 1974, so it's all very subsequent to one organization and one cutout, and then the next forming very very soon after. And Benoit de Bonvoisin would obviously play a major role in the PIO Foundation. So you have this major branch of the Belgian paramilitary. Well, it's not paramilitary, but Belgian military intelligence, right? Which is working very closely with private intelligence groups and was apparently headed by Jean-Marie Bougerel, who I had just mentioned. And so it was through these specific connections that you had Benoit de Bonvoisin basically man, just as far as like whenever you see how many different layers there are to this specific case, right? It begins to this is why it truly is the best example of how the system is structured, because it's not in any way simplistic. This is a very sophisticated and that is very clear and obvious in this example. But through the formation of these paramilitary, fascist groups, you basically have these ties forming between the mainstream and right-wing power network and private intelligence, which I believe was again, these far right-wing politicians like Van den Beinens are directly being tied into these fascist paramilitary groups. And so this is the world of private intelligence, once again, that we're witnessing, and how they kind of bridge that gap and hold hands and coexist. And so this is when, obviously, the power network of Van den Beinens and de Bonvoisin becomes even more tied into the Belgian fascist underground. And that's through an instructor specifically hired by Benoit de Bonvoisin. And that was allegedly to turn the Front de la Jeunesse into an effective fighting force. And his name was Madani Bouhouche, who was a member of the Belgian Gendarmerie. And he works as a part of the CIA-trained National Bureau of Drugs as well, right? And this organization was created under the direction of then Prime Minister Paul Van den Beinens, and also General Leon Francois, who was apparently a close associate of Michel Nihoul, Jose. So I feel like the monster of Belgium is a little too, just as far as he resurfaces far too often, and specifically in the context of Paul Van den Beynitz as a very close associate of. And if you're legitimately tied to the prime minister of a country, who obviously Paul Van den Beynitz, I believe, was entirely compromised by this very network, and Benoit de Bonvoisin, the Black Baron. I'm not in any way. Obviously, I think Paul Van den Beynitz was a sadistic pedophile, obviously, but I do think that he was almost being controlled from the outside by these various interests and special interests, and that begins to take form as well. But
Yeah, he's
anyway,
very much. I think it was earlier in this episode. You were kind of. I think you were talking about the X dossier and kind of the idea of how some of them kind of, once you're in, you almost just lean more into it because it's almost like a why not? I'm already trapped. May as well, I guess, enjoy my. So like, so point being is, it's like people are like, oh, they got they got leverage, and it's like, or I know you got God. I mean, these people a lot of times they know, but I mean, so they are trapped in a sense, but it's like of their own design. They want it. So
exactly.
yeah, I know. I guess I don't know where I'm going with that, anyways. But I guess just kind of with him, the idea that like, he can't really go against it, but he was never really going to anyways. Like, he likes being part of this club. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's obvious as well. It starts to show itself in a way whenever he arranges for his own kidnapping within one of these fascist clubs that are underneath the NEM club umbrella, and obviously a part of the fascist paramilitary organization. Or it's just interesting because you see how they essentially profit. They just have this major financial profit off of a fake kidnapping that was entirely staged by members of this network, which is just incredible that you could do something such as this, right? And I think whenever you begin to realize that there, obviously the clientele of all these nightclubs and things of that nature, which we'll get into probably in the next episode, it begins to again just you the mask removes itself, right? It basically falls to the wayside, and you are face to face with the monster of Belgium, and it's far more prolific and just as far as the scope of the network itself. But anyway, so as far as the Front de la Jeunesse, I think it is interesting how it was formed by Benoit de Bonvoisin, and just again, we're seeing a direct lens into the Belgian fascist underground, and this effective fighting force. Essentially, Madani Bouhouch was supposed to train up the Front de la Jeunesse to become an effective fighting force, and he, as I had mentioned, was a member of the Belgian Gendarmerie, and also trained up by the National Bureau of Drugs, which is a CIA cutout, and an organization created under Paul Van den Beynitz, as we had said as well. And apparently the Nihoul connection to Leon Francois, who is the general who's directly in charge of setting this up on behalf of Van den Beynitz. It's definitely the most extraordinary aspect of just having a direct link to Nihoul, again, once more, that you can point to. And so Frank, they apparently frequented many of these same clubs together, which we'll get into next episode, as I said. But it goes to show that they were very much, again, these individuals were, I believe, just they were hosting some of the most sinister parties that do very much relate to that of the Epstein network in a certain sense. So they were bosom buddies. In no way was this some kind of there's just, in no sense of the word can you separate the level of guilt in terms of the perpetrators involved, in my opinion, at this point. And that doesn't mean that the individuals who actually pulled the trigger, so to speak, aren't, there's not a higher level of guilt there. But I'm just pointing out the fact that all of these prominent figures are not just named in the network, as you can maybe claim with some of the Epstein examples, right? As far as like, well, we just have pictures or whatever, or so you could effectively be compromised just by association, right? Guilt by association. But in reality, I kind of feel like that's not in any way the case as far as the Dutroux affair, right? Like not, which is just interesting. Basically, if you didn't come into contact with this network and make it out alive, right? As far as it's almost the same concept philosophically or psychologically or whatever. I think philosophically is a better way to put it, but as what Nick Bryant said about the yachts, right? The just as far as the um, when he explained what the blackmail photographer Rusty Nelson had told him, right? As far as uh, what he was told about being involved in the network, being a part of the network, and what we've explained many times before, it's like you're on a yacht, right? And it's the most beautiful day. And while you're on this yacht, you can have anything and everything you could ever imagine, that you ever wanted. But the moment that you decide you want to get off the yacht, every other person on the yacht will make certain you drown. And I just thought there's no better way to explain how this network functions as well. So maybe you dip your toes in and you realize, holy shit, right? I'm not a prolific predator. Maybe I just made a bad decision. I don't think that really applies to this network. But anyone who did come into contact and was willing to blow the whistle, yeah, there's a massive body count tied to this case, and so again, I think as far as Madani Buhush being this trainer for the Front de la Jeunesse, well, he also was he happened to become the primary suspect, obviously, in I think the 1980s. Later on, he would become Madani Buhush would be a primary suspect in the Brabant killings, which will obviously devote a specific chapter of one of these episodes too. And again, they were responsible for unsolved terrorist attacks and things of that nature, and kidnappings, obviously, as I had mentioned. And so,
Just like the crux of why I tie these. A lot of people don't tie these two things together: Dutroux Affair and Gladio, and like in the Brabant killings, and it's like it's all right there at the same time. It's the same players, and this is why it's such a great example, and why we're taking this episode to really establish this. I know it kind of makes it so we have mission creep, and that's why we're on part 7 right now. But we'll probably end up doing so much because it's so rich, and it really is. I mean, hell, we had these Epstein drops. It really is just it's literally it's just time's a flat circle, basically. So.
no doubt. But so again, if I feel like the gendarmerie officer, I think his name was Marshal Lequeux. I actually remember that one, and he along with Madani Buhush were members of this fascist organization inside the gendarmerie. I found that fascinating because then we have almost like the Howard Hunt example of the OS, the Office of Security, that's basically this highly secretive, exclusive group inside the CIA that only directly answers to Richard Helms, the director at the time. And it's like that feels like what was essentially happening inside the gendarmerie at this point, which is basically the Belgian FBI, for anyone who's unaware. And so you have a specific gendarme officer who's Marshal Lequeux, and he, along with Madani Buhush, were members of this very exclusive group inside the gendarmerie known as Group G. Group G for Gladio? Could you imagine? I mean, it's possible, but either way, their intentions were to destabilize the Belgian state and secure power for the far right. And Lequeux would identify one of the key leaders of Group G as none other than the aforementioned General Leon Francois, who was bosom buddies with Michel Nihoul and attending many of the same nightclubs where these sex orgies and parties were being held. So no coincidence there.
Alongside VDB. Well, I don't think VDB was at clubs. I think they were at
No,
the
he was.
castle.
No, he
Oh, were
was.
they? I was thinking
Yeah.
they were more at the castle sucking fucks.
They
and
were
not at those
also at the
ones.
castles, but yeah, it's like it's very fascinating. There were multiple castles. I didn't realize that they had outfitted and even were investigating, like looking up on potentially acquiring, right, on behalf of the network, where they would then host parties later on. But yeah, surprisingly and honestly, it's extraordinary that you have the prime minister and these just such prominent members of within the Belgian society at this time, as far as politics, and they're all just attending at least the specific power players that are essentially the inner circle of Paul Van den Benens. I mean, they are all basically going to these nightclubs in the Le Trabat and the Dolo, which again are very prominent within this system. So once you begin to realize the clientele connections involved there, it looked almost as if they had a business model. Like, if you become a client of these clubs, right, and if you will financially commit enough or prove yourself valuable enough as a vital asset to the network, then and only then will you be welcomed in and gain access to all the various obvious just as far as sexual proclivities being involved in terms of the enterprise itself, but the overarching
If you act up, we have this group within a group within a group within a group to deal with it. Kind of this Aurora Boreas that I was mentioning earlier. Kind of how this circles back around. You see VDB and Bonvoisin, who are probably blackmailed themselves, who then create these entity that creates another splinter group from that, and then that ends up being the thing that we end up we'll probably mention some of these other minor affairs throughout this, like we had the Pinon affair and some other affairs. And there's many times it's always kind of referenced as like, oh, it's rumors of this blackmail or that blackmail and somebody dying as a result and yada yada yada. And it seems like the cleanup crew always ends up being this Group G or the Westland New Post that we're going to get into probably here in a bit. Some of these further splinter groups, whether they're, the Group G would be the Cowboys side of it, the cutout, and then you got the Indians side cutout would be the Westland New Post. So you got your gendarmeries, and then you got the little militia cutout, but they're glowies all the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have this General Francois, excuse me, who basically founded and served as the initial head of the National Bureau of Drugs. And man, whenever this, I'm glad we're doing this specifically because it will help lay the groundwork and foundation for the more layered details that are involved with what branches off of the structured network and the hierarchy that is essentially entrenched systematically. And through that, then you can kind of branch off into these various scandalous events and cases that are very relevant and they claim are obviously in no way right. What's the term as far as they aren't involved with each other. There's a specific term that is eluding me.
It's all
at
the same
moment.
fucking network.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just not the case whatsoever. And we'll also realize how so many of these cutouts that are under this very same umbrella would, obviously stage bombings domestically, but more than that, they would go out and intimidate witnesses and things of that nature, which obviously proves out as well. And I mean, the ex-witnesses specifically, which is we have detailed names and everything and who was apparently behind the intimidation and what it led to as well, which nothing ever ends well in this case, right? Just remember that. And but anyway, as far as this National Bureau of Drugs with direct support from the CIA, okay, which again, to what I didn't understand. Now, I knew with Wackenhut and Gladio, comes Iran-Contra, but I just didn't think it would be this direct. As far as there's no doubt in my mind this was at least a huge vehicle for facilitating Iran-Contra at large, internationally, as far as just another one of the networks relied upon in this international framework. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, basically, you have, I think it was Van den Beinens, obviously, along with, this is years before the Dutroux Affair, obviously, because you have Van den Beinens being accused of participating in drug-fueled orgies with underage girls. Okay, and this is, I believe, in the 1980s, obviously, and so you have five men: Van den Beinens, de Bonvoisin, Madani Buhush, and Marshal Lequeux. Okay, who, remember, Marshal Lequeux is the gendarmerie officer who is within, with Madani Buhush. They're within this a fascist organization inside of the gendarmerie known as Group G. And everyone, remember, FBI is gendarme, essentially, in my opinion, but it's very similar. So anyway, I'm trying to make sure we reflect briefly occasionally because of how much there is involved with this specific case and the names involved and everything else. So along with these men, Marshal Lequeux and then Leon Francois as well, they're not only all accused of being involved in sexual abuse and trafficking of children, along with Van den Beinens and Madani Buhush, apparently being specifically identified as associates of Michel Nihoul. So also apparently all involved in what was identified as a fascist conspiracy with the intention, and also an extension of, allegedly, the American-backed Gladio operation. And we will come to find that there were conversations that were had specifically about, one was about essentially a film being distributed and coming from the United States, okay, to Michel Nihoul. This discussion is being had at I forget the venue for it. We'll get into it in a moment because I don't want to botch the delivery of that. It's very important. But the point being is that all of these individuals are directly linked in with Michel Nihoul. So there we are with at least some of the most vital and prominent characters within the network, and I think the hierarchy itself being represented within this context. So we have a direct link, an extension of American-backed Gladio, and obviously no one needs a rundown on what Operation Gladio is at this point. It's very much the legacy of Gladio is alive and well, and I think this audience is well aware. But anyway, so we have clearly the Service de Documentation des Resignments of the Action 8. This is the name of apparently the document that translates to the Documentation, Information, and Action Service 8, or SDRA 8, which was a Belgian military branch of the Gladio Stay Behind networks. Okay, so this is apparently what they called the Stay Behind network in Belgium. So this is apparently set up by American and British intelligence, along with a joint civilian branch of Belgian Gladio, or STC Mob is what it's called, basically. For some reason, that's what it's referenced to, and it has which to me is an implication of organized crime, and that also begins to expose itself as well. And so a matter of SDRA 8, which was apparently used specifically, this branch was used to carry out false flag attacks to discredit the Belgian communist movement. And I believe we have something very similar playing out as far as in 1984 with a specific incident in which even American special forces and Belgian secret soldiers engaged in a raid on a police station in a small town named Vilsalm. I don't know, Velsalm, something to that effect. And so they're stealing weapons from a weapons cache and killing a warrant officer in this crazy apparent raid that took place. So some of the weapons that were stolen, by the way, would turn up in an apartment that belonged to a left-wing terrorist group. Oh, I thought this was only right-wing, Jose. A left-wing terrorist group, the Communist Combatant Cells, suggesting that just like in Italy, elements of Gladio were posing as left-wing terror organizations in order to carry out attacks that would hurt the reputation of Belgian communists. So, as much as obviously the Soviet justification is very much a part of Gladio, but it's a major pretext they rely upon to essentially manufacture consent if this strategy is ever exposed in a way. And yeah, so we have false flag, emotion arousing, violent false flags and terrorist attacks that are directly in line with that of the Gladio playbook. And so yeah, I just think that when you have all of these various series of attacks that are carried out at this very same period in time, with the Brabant massacres, which we'll get a little bit more into the details of at some point. And obviously, these are major assassinations that took place and terrorist attacks and bombings.
Yep.
And I think
they're probably like one of the go-to for most people examples when they think of Gladio. So just for people to understand.
True. And it also looks like I think Brabant it was the Brabant massacres were basically from 81 to 85, something like that. And I think it was like almost 30 people, like 28 people murdered at seemingly random locations, including restaurants and grocery stores. But yeah, it was almost as if they were attempting to deliberately provoke a general panic in a way.
There's also theories that it could have been that. It could have been a mix of that they were actually targeting legitimate targets because not legitimate, but like in
targeted
like they actually deserved it.
Yeah,
because a lot of these were claims that these. If you look at some of them, I mean, I haven't looked deep enough to have a strong opinion, but that is one theory that a lot of these people were connected to some of the blackmail or connected individuals and. Whether it be sending a message or, someone was threatening that, a lot of it is this blackmail going on in the background. And it is these same networks carrying this stuff out.
Man, I'm telling you, there's a scandal in the early 1990s that basically involves these 5 white Mercedes, and they're owned by a company that was basically called Sopar Auto, is what it was called, Sopar Auto. And it was located at the same exact address as AS. It was not the same ASCO. I believe this is essentially it's Achat Services Commerce. I'm not entirely sure what that translates into, but it's not to be confused with essentially the company that has the factory of the films that I mentioned that we'll get into once we actually introduce the nightclubs and how that ties in, right? Because I do think we need to stay within a framework of just as far as what's the term for structuring something is comprehensively. We need to stay within a certain structure as far as the timing of these events, and that's at least what I'm attempting to do. And so with the ASCO, with the factory, that's specifically regarding ASCO Industries, which is a Belgian company based in Zaventem, and designs and manufactures components for the aerospace industry, including major parts for aircraft manufacturers like Boeing and things of that nature, right? At least that's how it's defined even to this day. But right, I'm not trying to get off in the weeds. I just thought it was interesting because clearly this scandal happens to just reveal a little bit of how this network functions specifically. And and all of these individuals who were involved with this scandal were apparently members of the clientele, these prominent clientele members of the nightclubs that exist. And so it looks like they had French license plates on these Mercedes, but the reports about these white Mercedes following schoolgirls and photographing them had been going around, and some informant told an individual named Christian Dubois that ASCO was behind them. And obviously, it looks like ASCO and Superato were owned by Jean-Louis Delamotte. Okay, so this is another power player within the network. He's a client of Les Atrabat, which, again, nightclub involved with Nihoul and Van de Benitz and de Bonvoisin, and French Freemasons basically structured this. And again, next episode, but still, we're putting to, so basically, ASCO and Superato are owned by Jean-Louis Delamotte, a client of Les Atrabat in the Dolo. And according to the informant, the occupants of the white Mercedes were putting together catalogs of pictures of children by which their clients would pick one. The child would be kidnapped, locked in Belgium for a while, and then exported to Eastern Europe or to Thailand. The price for each child was reported to be 300,000 francs or 7,500 euros. So the fact that this legitimately happened, and ASCO was founded by Delamotte along with Michel Forgeois, who's also a power player, and Marlene de Cocker, who's also involved in the dossiers. Apparently, they formed this company in July of '91. And this was basically, you have witnesses in the area claiming to have seen Michel Nihoul there with black girls. This is what I had mentioned earlier, and had the impression that these girls were on transit. So Nihoul was friends and business partners with Delamotte, the founder of ASCO. Nihoul spoke with an accomplice, Dutroux, at the Dolo around 92 to 93. Now, this is the testimony I was mentioning before about videos imported from the USA, from America, which showed black children being tortured and burned in cages. So apparently, additionally, witnesses in the area claimed to have spotted Michelle Martin, the wife of Marc Dutroux, Michel Lelièvre, Bernard Weinstein, around the surroundings of this company, ASCO. ASCO goes bankrupt in 1994, and almost like the tunnels in New York, right? The Brooklyn tunnels. What do we have? And this is not funny at all. I'm sorry. It's disgusting. But it goes bankrupt in 94, and what's revealed? 5 mattresses along with some baby milk were found at its headquarters after it was searched. So anyway, when we get into the nightclubs, we'll get into more of that. And as terrible as that is, obviously I won't be graphic for the sake of being graphic, but
yeah. Austin, we've thrown a lot at the wall today. We can, I guess, continue to go on, but I feel like we've probably given enough for people to sit on. There's only one more thing I really feel like we should probably establish before we move on and we get into the more complicated machinations of this network. And that is, I mentioned the cowboy. We do have this like dialectic of like the capitalists, or not the capitalists, the Cold War Nazi versus communist dialectic going on. But we also have the cowboy versus Indian dialectic, sort of, that I was laying out. As with the Group G, you have or the Gendarmerie, who are key players in this. They're let's be real, this is the official players. This is the perceived white hats, and then you have we talked about the Front de la Jeunesse, but there ended up becoming a further splinter group, the Westland New Post.
Exactly.
And so I feel like we got to at least establish that before we go, because it's another interesting thing, especially when we get into Paul Latnus, who that motherfucker glows. I'm pretty sure he has direct ties to like NATO, but. Anyways, so that's like the further paramilitary, like they're the ones doing real shit type stuff. Yeah. And they're also frequently connected to, when I say cowboys and Indians, it's also kind of the illusion of it, because at the same time, a lot of these guys are, they kind of work together at times. It seems they may even have been involved in like things like the Brabant, because the Westland New Post comes up frequently with things like the Brabant killings, as well as some of the Group G guys. I think it may even be, I may be misremembering this, but I think some of the Group G guys may even have been involved in the Westland. I don't know. But anyways,
they were, and
exactly. So there's literally no difference basically between the two, which is some degree.
No,
so
not at all, and that's why I think it's basically claimed that the most likely culprit for the Brabant killings was essentially the fascist paramilitary organization known as the Westland New Post. So this was formed in 1981 within the Front de la Jeunesse, as we said before, right? So the Front de la Jeunesse is already essentially an offshoot of the NEM club, right? And so again, we're seeing a very interesting, almost, it's like this. It's what's the term for cancer? Essentially, just
metastasizing.
I know I can't say it right, but the point being is that it's essentially growing more. Just it's basically just almost. Damn it, I can't think of the term where it's like self-creating its own, but anyway.
Exponentially consuming, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that might be.
Either way, you get the point. Is essentially how just it continually grows in terms of these various cutouts that are just effectively being formed whenever necessary. Honestly, is what's happening here. And so you have the Front de la Jeunesse being formed, or I mean, within the Front de la Jeunesse, you have the Westland New Post being formed by 81. And apparently itself was a brainchild, is how it's explained and described, a brainchild of Baron Benoit de Bonvoisin. So again, someone who I view as almost him along with Nihoul, because of how just disgusting they look. They haunt my dreams as far as like the outward appearance of these men. And then also I think understanding what they were capable of. It's something that is just, it's disrupts you to your core in a way. But anyway, so the leader of the Front de la Jeunesse was Francis de Sonia, which we've mentioned a couple of times. And so he confirmed that the Westland New Post had not only been formed out of the Front de la Jeunesse, but also out of the circle of fascist infiltrators within the Belgian gendarmerie known as Group G. So this was ran by the CIA-backed General Leon Francois. So it looks like the CIA is directly involved in all of this, unfortunately. What a concept.
What?
So,
Never.
yeah. So the commander of the Westland New Post would be Paul Latinus. And this is a fascist who had been recruited by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, apparently back in the late 1960s.
DIA, that's right, yeah. I couldn't remember what it was earlier. It was one of those earlier three-letter agencies that no one really talks about anymore. So I was like, I just couldn't remember what it was. Because I remember when I looked into him, this guy glows like the sun. But go on, DIA, absolutely. There you go.
Yeah. And so, again, the DIA was very active back then, obviously, if you remember that. And also the Office of Naval Intelligence is a key, just, I think, a very prominent group within the intelligence apparatus that wields much more power than people would imagine.
OG spook shit, yeah.
Exactly.
That's like OSS granddaddy type shit,
Yeah, that's like how you could run the Maura Radford affair and literally spy on the Joint Chiefs of Staff covertly. I mean, like how could you set up something like that within the context of the domestic U.S.? It's just so funny that people don't have the frame of reference, and it just takes, I don't know, doing a series in Watergate to be able to remember how you can essentially, I don't know, just have a perfect lens into how they effectively just disrupt any sort of real, just honest flow of power, right? That's just not how this works in terms of the system itself, and how it's really corrupt inherently. And so Anyway, we see this Paul Latinus, right? He's recruited by the DIA. This is the late 60s, so this is when all heads are rolling in terms of the political dissidents at the time, and RFK and MLK and Malcolm X, and they're all essentially getting the bullet, and so you have. Paul Latinus was also trained by NATO before being recruited by Van den Benens and Benoit de Bonvoisin. And it looks like, how did they recruit him? Through the Public Information Office, headed by Jean-Marie Bougerol, a member of the SDRA-8, the fascist paramilitary Gladio arm or branch of the Stay Behind networks that were structured by the unholy alliance, as we've said, right? And that is what has structured this unfortunate paramilitary underground that disrupted this entire, this basically 20 years, 30 years probably, that this specific network was, I'm not saying that they're out of power even. I'm not entirely certain. I haven't followed that through, honestly, to who's effectively in power in this very moment. So I'm not sure what's going on in Belgium, but I certainly don't think, I forgot what there's an article I read, and it was titled, "Something is Rotten in the State of Belgium." All right, something to that effect, right? It was like basically the nation of Belgium, but I think it was the state. And there's nothing better. Obviously it's a play on rotten in Denmark in a way, but which is terrible. But at the same time, it's like that is really a great way to almost encapsulate this in a certain sense. So that's just the way that I feel about it. But anyway, as far as this member of the SDRA-8, Jean-Marie Bougerol. So between the training of Paul Latinus, under U.S. intelligence and NATO, his employment by a member of the Belgian Stay Behind network, and his membership in the secret fascist sect within the gendarmerie, led by a general handpicked by the CIA, the Westland New Post, obviously proves out in this very way, as an obvious extension of Operation Gladio and the terror networks that were very much entrenched by this branch of the Stay Behind network. So the claim, like any claim that Westland New Post, the WNP, was behind the Brabant massacres, absolutely, I think were essentially, whenever you look at who pushed back, right? Because the claim that the Westland New Post was behind the Brabant massacre was asserted by Marshal Lequeux, who was the former member of both Group G and the Westland New Post, who asserted that the original purpose of the killings. So he's blowing the whistle, man. This is a very prominent figure, and Marshal Lequeux, former member of this very fascist infiltrating unit of the gendarmes, Group G, and also, member of the Westland New Post. He claims that the purpose of the Brabant killings was to create an atmosphere of, I don't know, maybe like a strategy of tension. He says an atmosphere of fear in Belgium, and to blame the attacks on the left. It's pretty simple, and so I think it was another member of the Westland New Post, right? His name was Michel Liebert, I think is how you pronounce it, Liebert. And he corroborated Marshal Lequeux's claims of the WMPs being responsible essentially for the killings, and he claims that basically he would be sent to scope out grocery stores by Paul Latinus prior to the attacks taking place. And that one of Liebert's main contacts apparently was a close associate of the Westland New Post. And obviously, Madani Buhush, the close associate of Michel Nihoul. So again, we have the obvious tie-ins. And so at the end of the Brabant massacres, you have Paul Latinus, WMP leader, supposedly committing suicide in 1984 under very suspicious, serious circumstances, it seems, and dead from strangulation with his own telephone cord wrapped around his neck somehow. So Yeah, other members of the WMP were very skeptical about about
Seems legit.
this had really been a suicide, obviously. So yeah, and then I think it was after the Breivik killings began to cease. You had I think it was like almost it was like 19 it was late 1980s. You have Madani Buhush, who's essentially released after at this point, right? And he had apparently been caught trying to break out of jail with the help of the WMP in
Yeah.
1980. And so there you have it, right? Is
Yeah.
what
The gang's back together.
exactly. I mean, it's just so
Well,
insane that this is the story, right?
Well,
So this
Austin, I think let's not get sucked into this too much. It is fun. We could keep going, but I think we've perfectly kind of set the stage. We've established the network, and I think we need to leave a little meat in the bone because now we've established a network, and now we need to go into how a little bit more into how the network operates, fill in some of those blanks, maybe talk about their venues and the methods by which they did it. So that'll probably be more the focus on next week. Maybe even some more of the exploits of Group G, Westland New Post, all of these different cutouts, how they operate, how they're moving in these clubs, these castles. I think it kind of establishes how this just comes back full circle. Kind of how does this happen? This is a system that reinforces itself, like it creates its own little sub-entities, and those sub-entities then reinforce the upper entities, and so on and so forth. Almost a little perfect system of checks and balances.
Yeah.
But with that, I think we're at a perfect spot. Austin, you want to let people know where they can find you at? And we'll be here with another one here soon.
Sounds good, brother. Yeah, you guys can you already know where to find me. The Underclass Podcast for sure. Subscribe to the YouTube. Definitely, if you have the means, go support the Patreon. I think we just did episode 43 of whatever this is. So yeah, and beyond that, man, I think here shortly I'll finally dedicate myself to my next solo project. I think which will more than likely I think overlap in terms of the theme of what I'm attempting to the subject matter, unfortunately. But yeah, no better time than now, I would say, just in terms of the state of the world we are in, and the pedophile occupied government, as we say. So yeah, I think this is definitely a great place to stop, and I made a note as well, so we'll know just where to begin next in part 8, and really we're about to get into, I think descend into the real darkness, right? Which is, yeah, I'm not really looking forward to it as much as I think it's very important. So yeah, nothing but love, brother.
I love you too, bud. We got to have love to get through this darkness. But with that, for those who want to support what I'm doing, leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, all the major audio podcatchers, and Twitter as well, at Tower Gang Jose's, where you can find that there. And if you want to support the show the best way you can do that with money over at patreon.com/nowayjose2020. You can see the QR code right there if you want to use that suckaroo. And there you get to access to early episodes at the low cost of $2. You get a whole host of other perks as well. I do try to do 1 to 2 of those early episodes per week. This is one of them right here. You would have got this weeks earlier than the poors if you were supporting. You also get the ad-free RSS feed. You also get the Telegram. You get access to the pre-show, post-show, and video calls of me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, Already Dead. And also give a big shout out to my sponsors who are my highest level on Patreon. It's a big thank you for their support. I have my previous co-host on Tower Gang at Learn to Toad, also at Brigade D's, at ZOVRCK, at _Zeal, Tim Tuttle, at Jolly and Klebold, big fan of the show, Torme, at Wayne Teckless, one Eric Carver Kids, No Free Lunch, Jack, Mark Vestibule, and Jacob Winograd of the Biblical Anarchy Podcast. With that, guys, we are out of here. Love you all. We will see you on the next one. Also, pop in every now and then for the morning show, the morning dump. It goes typically Monday through Friday around 11 a.m. Eastern. We don't always make it every day. We don't always make it at that time. But if you hit subscribe and hit that bell for notifications, then you'll know when I am. But that's when we try to do it. So be there. Love you all. Bye-bye.